Vance Ginn, president of Ginn Economic Consulting. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. So the question now becomes for the state of Texas, can we gradually eliminate the property tax?
Well, we can, and there's been a lot of discussion about that so far this session about how much property tax could be provided, tax relief could be provided, because as we know, Texans are feeling this burden all across the state of Texas. And so it's important to really break this down, make sure that we get the most relief possible. The legislators came in this session with $33 billion in surplus. That means over-collected taxpayer money that should go back to the taxpayer. I would like to see most, if not all of that, going back through property tax relief. And importantly, this is the school district's maintenance and operation property tax, which is primarily, it's essentially a statewide property tax because the state finance formulas that the state, controls, that's where this money goes out to. So that's the one that's really under consideration right now. And the way to do that is by what's called compression, which is just reducing property taxes, buying them down using state dollars collected by the taxpayer to buy down those local property taxes. And if you do that with surplus dollars over time, it could take 8 to 10 years to fully eliminate nearly half the property tax burden in Texas. So yes, it can be done.
So, compression, and you explained it, but I want to see if I can get a better explanation, because what we're talking about is very complex, right? And so, yes, the easy thing to ask you is compression is your friend. So explain compression again for us and how this would work and how the state could buy down and gradually eliminate the property tax altogether.
So compression really is just reducing the tax rates over time for school maintenance and operation property taxes. You've got your appraisal, you've got your tax rate, and that equals the total amount of tax collections by those school districts. And so if you don't touch the appraisals here, you just look at the tax rates, what compression means is that you take those state dollars, mostly sales taxes, the surplus that's there, and you reduce that property tax rate. And as you do that, that replaces those dollars that were already going to schools with those state dollars. And that's called compression. You're just reducing the amount that's being collected by property taxes. And it's still, fully funding schools based on the school finance formulas that are out there today on enrollment and a number of other measures that are out there. And so it just simply, it's reducing those rates so that you have less property tax burden for every Texan. And this helps homeowners, this helps renters, and this helps employers, which is so important here. And once you do that, the idea would be to use surplus dollars every biennium, which means every 2-year budget period. You limit government spending to population growth plus inflation, which is the new spending limit that was passed in 2021. And any revenue that comes above that by the state, which is a surplus, you would use that to buy down, compress the school district property taxes over time. And using historical averages, that would create a situation where we could eliminate nearly half, it's about 42% of the overall property taxes collected across the state. You could eliminate about that in about 8 to 10 years.
And I wanted to ask you about that because the lieutenant governor the other day said that couldn't happen. And I asked him specifically, I said, are you saying, Lieutenant Governor, that you don't support eliminating the property tax? And he said, you can't get there because gradually it keeps going back. He said, homestead exemptions are permanent. They're in the Constitution. If you get rid of property taxes altogether, the school property tax, which are about half the property tax bill, you only have a sales tax to prop up a state. And he said it would grow from 30 to 35 to 40 million people in the next decade. What happens when you have a decline? The sales taxes go down. You'll have no money to pay for schools and for other state programs. He said you can't be a one-legged horse. That was his answer. How do you respond to that?
I'd start by saying, homestead exemption, while it is permanent in the sense that if you raised it from $40,000 to $100,000, that $100,000 exemption, which just means that takes it off of your taxable liability for the value of your home, that would be permanent. But you've still got to fund that over time. That there's going to be a long run cost to doing that. The problem is that you have appraisals that go up above $100,000, pretty quickly. So the value of your home continues to go up, and that will mean that the benefit, the reduction in your taxes collected will not go down any further. So it's a temporary property tax relief in that sense of the word. It also shifts the burden. It shifts the burden of the government spending on schools, right? Because there's going to be some cost of that, and that's through taxes, from homeowners to businesses and renters and those who don't have a primary source of residence or other residences that they have. Other property that they have. And so it's a shifting of the burden from one person to another. To me, it's more about votes than it is about actual property tax relief, where that compression, on the other hand, is long-term. It is permanent. Once you buy those rates down, unless the legislature wants to let those taxes go back up, which I don't think that they will, then this will also be permanent. And it's the only way that you can get to zero school district property taxes is by buying down those rates, because that rate can go to zero, which zero out of $100 valuation for a home is $0. And so that's still $0, and you've eliminated that tax. Whereas if you're doing homesteads, you could go up to $1 million. I don't know, $1 billion. At some point, you're going to be narrowing the base of the people that are actually being taxed. And that's why you shift the burden somewhere else. And that's why you can't eliminate property taxes through raising the homestead exemption. And so I really question whether the lieutenant governor or others who don't want to go the compression route, if they really want to eliminate property taxes. And from that quote you just mentioned, maybe the lieutenant governor does not, but many Texans do. It's also in the GOP platform to eliminate property taxes. And I think that at the end of the day, we need to have the state fully fund 100% of school district property taxes, because that's what the Texas Constitution says in Article 7, Section 1, says that the Texas legislature shall adequately and efficiently fund public free schools, not the school districts, not them setting a tax rate. And so I think it's up to the legislature to do this. And this is a great opportunity to do that. We have a large surplus now, and we will hopefully in the future with more economic growth and prosperity across the state of Texas. And this is the way to get to zero. So I think it can be done. I know it can from the research that I've done in the past, and this is the path to do it.
So are you saying that the state of Texas has been violating the Texas Constitution all these years and how they fund schools?
I think it's something that needs to be looked at, and Supreme Courts have said that the way that we are funding schools has been unconstitutional when you looked at a statewide property tax. It's why the last time they did this back in 2006, they lowered the school M&O property tax from $1.50 to $1, because the Supreme Court said they had to do that. And that was the $14.2 billion of tax relief in 08-09. But the way they paid for that was by expanding the franchise tax to what's called the margins tax now. They increased the motor vehicle sales tax, and they raised the cigarette tax. So they raised taxes in order to cut a tax, and there really wasn't that much relief. But it goes back to what the Supreme Court said, that this was a statewide property tax, which found it unconstitutional. And I think that there needs to be looked at of why the legislature, the state, is not paying fully for school M&O, and when they push the burden on to school districts. This won't take away, the sovereignty of the school districts to make decisions on their own. It's just a method of finance. Where does the money come from? Instead of this Robin Hood system where we take money from some places that have high values and shift it, redistribute it across the economy, let's just go ahead and use sales taxes to do it. And I know there's some talk about having a three-legged stool and having multiple legs to a stool on sound tax policy, but I think a bar stool with a strong base is just as sturdy as any three-legged stool or four-legged stool. How many ever stools they want to come up with a number of taxes. I think the sales taxes is the best way to go for Texas, for not having a personal income tax, and for us not having a property tax, because ultimately a property tax is immoral and it doesn't allow us to have the right to ever own our property. We're always renting from the government.
So let me go back and ask you just what happens in a downturn, because we've had the downturns here in the state of Texas. I remember the 2011 session was tough because schools got cut pretty badly because the sales tax revenue was down sharply because they had come out of the state had come out of the recession. And, it wasn't as bad in Texas as the rest of the United States, but it was bad enough. So how, if the economy were to go south again, and there's obviously a lot of talk of recession again, if that were to happen and there's no property tax for revenue and the state sales tax goes down, how do you fund schools?
One of the good things about sales tax is it's based more on market transactions, what people are actually buying, and based on their income as well. Whereas property taxes continue to ratchet up, whether it's connected with their incomes going up or not, which makes it unaffordable and people lose their homes often on that. Sales taxes, it is a little bit more volatile than property taxes, but it's not that much more volatile, because what you see is that you'll get the dip, but you also get the faster rise up as the economy comes back online. And if there is a downturn, I think that we will see a downturn at some point, no doubt about it. And when you look at historical declines in general revenue, which is what the money is that you'd be paying out of this from the state, mostly from sales taxes, that money comes back pretty quickly. So you see a dip and then it comes right back. And remember, we're over a biennial 2-year budget cycle in Texas. So there is plenty of time for that money to come back. And so I think that's part of it, is that you have these strong recoveries with sales taxes, even as you have the dips. But the other thing that I would look at here, that I think that this point is overblown, that we don't have enough money, is that the comptroller has said we're going to have about $27 billion in the rainy day fund. The rainy day fund is there to cover unforeseen revenue shortfalls, which would be exactly this sort of situation. If you had an economic downturn, revenue falls, you dip into the rainy day fund, you fill that gap, and then we get back into normal sort of budgeting. So you have that opportunity. And remember, this is only using surplus dollars where you would buy it down each time. Yes, there will be a little bit more that will need to be funded in the out years, and as you move forward, because of valuation increases, to make sure that rate doesn't go back up. That's why this is permanent. You keep that rate low at the rate that you set, and then you continue to buy it down until it gets to zero. But that could all be done within normal, standard conservative budgeting through population growth plus inflation, limiting spending to that. We can fully fund schools. We can fully fund the other areas. And let's make sure that we're doing best for Texans overall. And I think this is the path to go down. And one last thing here is that schools are also sitting on a large amount of reserves, what they call excess reserves, where they have some of that money for operating budget, but there's a lot more money. I mean, I've heard, remember Huberty a couple of sessions ago said it was like $20 billion. So why is there money sitting on the sides when it should be going to schools? And that would allow for us to also make sure that we could cover any sort of unforeseen revenue shortfalls.
And so let me ask you, does the state, if the state legislature were to decide, and it may, we'll see, if it goes ahead with this, and because the governor just tweeted last night, he now favors a gradual elimination of the property tax. Would the state have to raise the sales tax at all to compensate?
No. Not under this approach. Whenever you're using surplus dollars from general revenue, there would not be a need to raise the sales tax.
And you mentioned renters, this could help renters. You're assuming that because there would be no property tax for their landlord for these giant apartment complexes, they wouldn't be paying a property tax anymore. So you're saying they could pass it along to renters.
Correct. And I should just mention that I'm not saying that this will eliminate all property taxes. This is nearly half the burden of property taxes. I do think that there are some mechanisms out there. Some bills were filed this session for cities and counties and special purpose districts. Those are the other types of property taxes that you have out there, where if they limited their spending to population growth plus inflation and use their own surpluses to buy down their property taxes, that way we can have the state buying down the school portion and the locals buying down their own. That's the way that I really could see a great opportunity to eliminate all property taxes, unless we wanted to have a major tax reform. And I don't see that being a part of the process, whereas this sort of approach of using surplus dollars to buy down property taxes is the way to go. And I think, for renters, some would argue, well, landlords aren't going to bring down their rent. But just think about this: through competition, when you have one place across the street that's being rented out, and they reduce theirs because their property tax goes down, then the other place is going to be vacant until they get somebody to move in. And so that means that they're going to want to cut their rent. So I think over time, you will see rent will also go down, which will benefit renters in the process. And then the last thing, it also helps employers who have a business, who have property. As their property taxes go down, cut nearly half by eliminating the school M&O property tax over a decade. That also gives them the opportunity to have lower prices, pay higher wages, employ more workers. And so it's a dynamic effect that happens throughout the economy that allows for more growth and job creation.
And would that attract other businesses to the state of Texas from other states?
Definitely. I mean, this will make us more competitive overall. Texas is already a hotbed for places people wanting to move and businesses want to move to Texas. Just think if we had half the property tax we do today, no personal income tax, this would be the place that people would want to go. You're already having competition with states like Florida and Tennessee who don't have a personal income tax, and they're looking at ways to provide other tax relief there. If we don't do it, we're going to be falling behind these other states. And so I think it's imperative that Texas takes the biggest approach possible this session to this path to elimination. And I think that's through what the governor's outlined here of compression. And I've been harping on this for a long time. I've been doing research on this for about a decade. This is a great path to go down, and it will be better for Texas overall from a competitive nature, for paying for services, and ultimately for job creation and prosperity.
Two other quick questions.
Yeah.
And that was, again, just to clarify, this would eliminate all school property taxes. It wouldn't eliminate counties and cities. They would have to figure it out on what they wanted to do. But the school taxes is it half, or is it even more than half of your property tax bill?
For some people, it will be more than half, the school maintenance and operation portion. There's also what's called INS, interest and sinking. That's the debt portion. If you added both of those together, for a lot of people, it would be more than half of their property tax bill. What I'm talking about here, though, is just the maintenance and operation, not the debt portion that would be funded by the school and through this compression, or by the state from this compression over time. And that's about 42% of all property taxes collected across the state. So there will be some, right, depending on which school district you're in and where you live, where it could be more than half your bill that you could benefit from whenever that goes away. But across the state of Texas, it's about 42%.
And this is, again, the maintenance and operation part.
Yes.
And then my last question is, the lieutenant governor said that the homestead exemption provides more relief, provides almost double the relief in a tax bill than just compression alone. So what do you say to that?
So the homestead will provide more relief to just homesteaders than the compression will, because the homestead is narrow. The base is narrow of who gets the benefit out of all Texans. It's just those with a primary residence. That's the property that gets the benefit. Whereas the compression is broad-based, right? And so that's where sound tax policy comes in, the broadest base with the lowest rate. And so that influences homesteaders, those without a home that will have other property, renters, and which means the landlords, right? And then you have the employers as well. So it's broad-based in that sense. And so I think that's why it's a preferable approach. It's more equitable, it's more fair in that sense. Everybody's getting some benefit out of this. And I would suggest, as an economist, someone who looks at this, is that the businesses don't pay 100% of that tax anyway. They just submit the tax. The payments are actually made by us, the people, through the form of lower wages, fewer jobs, and higher prices. And so by providing broad-based tax relief through compression, you're benefiting homesteaders as well, even more than these numbers that they put out there. I don't know that it's double from a homestead, their approach that they're looking at. I think some of that is including the homestead that's already available. I'd like to see the breakdown of what's the additional benefit to homesteaders instead of the $1,200 or $1,300 that they're saying per year. How much of that is the $40,000 homestead exemption that we have today, and how much of it is the actual $60,000 what they're proposing to increase it by to get up to $100,000? If you separate those out, I think we'd have a much closer apples to apples comparison between what's happening with compression and what's happening with the homestead exemption.
Vance Ginn, president of Ginn Economic Consulting. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate all of this analysis.
Thank you so much.